If we all give ourselves permission to stand in who we are, which we're all already doing, and we are that light, then it gives other people permission to take that risk to do it for themselves. And now we have an empowered world. All people have value, not only 1% of the world's gifted, and everybody has equal value. We all bring something different to the table. And so to come out of that judgment and say, what cool thing do we all get to bring to make something really neat? I kind of think of it like tea, like we have a base tea and then you add all the different flavors or all the different things, and it's still beautiful.
Hey everyone, it's Tamara Thompson with Broadcast Your Authority, and I'm super grateful for our next special guest that's flown in across the country to join us, even with delays and everything. Like, she made it here, so I'm so excited. Our next guest is Dianne A. Allen. She's a visionary executive mentor. She's a great friend, colleague, and client of ours too. And, she's such a unique individual. Like, she's so inspiring. She's so powerful. And the moment I actually met her at a workshop, I knew that we were connected in some way. So Dianne, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me here. I'm so excited.
You have such a unique gift because you actually help neurodivergent, highly sensitive, and purpose-driven leaders in what you do to help unlock their potential and share their message with the world. And you've worked with high-end executives, musicians, educators. Can I name drop some of the individuals you've worked with?
Sure, you can.
So I believe that this person also released a book that you were mentioned in. Was this with Kenny Loggins?
Yes.
Yes. Do we all know who Kenny Loggins is? The musician.
That's so cool.
I mean, you've worked with a lot of different individuals and you're just very humble and you don't necessarily name drop, but you've worked with incredible individuals. What really brought you into dedicating yourself to embrace this life and really tap into this? How did you get started to really fine tune into this journey?
That's a long story. Cliff note version is that when I was young, I was really shy, and I'm also gifted, and I'm also neurodivergent, and I was bullied a lot and all of that. So I've done a lot of healing over the years, a lot. And I've been doing this 45 years now. And at one point I was running a substance abuse treatment center for corporate CEO executive types. And a lot of them were like, what are we going to do when we leave? What are we going to do when we leave? And I'm like, well, I'll figure out something. And so I started just noticing that I had this real gift to custom create programs. No matter what somebody wanted, I could just intuitively dial in and create something. And I'm like, wow, this is kind of fun because I don't like boredom. And so I started creating custom things. And so I launched Visions Applied at that time. And since then, I haven't looked back. And it's been really magical. Kenny Loggins, actually, I've worked with him, toured with him, and, was part of his support team because he's highly intuitive. He is very, very sensitive, and he's a high quality human being on every level. And what he needed from me was somebody that had his back spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. Like, he'd come off stage and I was right there. And when I toured with him, I was in the room next to him if he needed something, or he'd call me when he got off stage and I was home, and he'd go, okay, I'm finally on the same time zone. I'm like, it's 4 a.m. Okay, what do you need? He goes, meditate, do a meditation for me, and you'll know when I fall asleep. I need, And so I have the honor to be that for multiples of people. I work with the University of Florida neuroscience team. So it's all different kinds of people helping them get unstuck, live their best life, because I want gifted neurodivergent people to step into their authority so that human race doesn't go extinct.
Mm.
And that's the power behind it. And so I'm really blessed to have got to work with him because and we still talk every once in a while. He's great.
I love that. I mean, for those individuals that may not understand the term neurodivergent, like as a neurodivergent individual, what would you say to the people that are watching this? Like, how would you describe this type of individual that you work with?
The type of individual I work with that we call neurodivergent is gifted, which means a higher IQ. Often they have intense sensitivities or overexcitabilities or certain ways their brain functions. It is qualitatively different than neurotypical people. And so there's a lot of understanding how that asymmetry is. And then when you add neurodivergent to it, typically people think of things like ADHD or those kinds of things. I call them flavors. I try not to stick with all of the different diagnoses, but these are people who do not process the world the way typical people do. So they're always outliers and often misunderstood. But my belief is there's a genius in there that if we can let that free, now we're talking.
I'm so curious. How does this show up in the workplace? And what are some tools and strategies that you find really helpful for people who fall into this category?
I think the biggest one is education, teaching the leaders that I work with and the other team members that there is a qualitative difference and that we don't have to try to fit into something we're not. And one of the big skills I teach people is space. Give yourself space. And most neurodivergent people are actually introverted. So it's like, okay, you can go within, you can have a safe space, you can have psychological safety, and teach people around you, these are the things I need. In fact, I kind of use humor and go, well, I'm neurodivergent, so that's why I do this. And then people will look at me funny, but then they'll ask questions about what that means. And now we have a dialogue, so there's understanding instead of judgment. And I think that's really important. And so I do a lot of teaching and role playing with the different teams I work with. And it's so fun to watch them get the ahas of, oh, you've got this skill and you've got this way of seeing it. And we can put that together. And now there's a synergy where previously it was a wall and a block and a judgment.
Are there ways that it shows up for neurodivergent people that is perhaps different from typical performers that leaders within that group could identify?
One of the big ones is neurodivergent people actually think differently. So one of the hallmarks is if somebody says, show me your work, they can't because they know. Like, I already know the answer to the question, so I don't need to show you my work. And that can be a problem sometimes. Well, you have to have it all written down. Well, not necessarily. That's one big one. Another big one with my people is they can get 8 hours of work done in about 2 hours. So it's real easy to get taken advantage of. So I teach them pacing. If it takes 8 hours, take 8 hours to deliver it. And be careful that you don't set yourself up to be like the default word of the company and now you're working equal to 3 people because you're neurodivergent and fast. And so it's all about making friends with who we are and how can we kind of integrate into a system that's quite interesting.
What are some of the common challenges that people that have that giftedness face in entrepreneurial circles or in business and corporate settings? And how can we help them navigate that?
Well, it's interesting because when you say the entrepreneurial setting, I was at a big conference and they were talking about the entrepreneurial brain and they were really talking about neurodivergence. Yeah. So most neurodivergent people have difficulty in corporate settings if they're too overly structured because it doesn't fit. So they land in entrepreneur ventures or things where there's more freedom. So I pay attention to a lot of educating the corporate people and other people and teaching my client to love themselves and have compassion. Like, yes, you do it differently. Yes, there's only 1% of the total population that fits in this. So you're a minority coming out of the gate. And so I said, you're in a room of 100 people. There's you. And maybe there's 2 or 3 unless you're surrounded by other neurodivergent people, and to learn your own patterns, learn how you learn how you process, how you work, and then use that versus trying to fit into something that's not you.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. How would you, if you thought your child had some of these traits, for example, how would you as a parent help encourage them to not just have compassion for themselves, but maybe harness some of those gifts?
Oh, yes. I work with a lot of families, and a lot of the adults I work with find out they're neurodivergent because they're getting help for their kids. And it runs in families. Yes. So if a child has it, I start looking to the parents or grandparents, like, where is it in the family? And a lot of times I run into a lot of adults who always knew they were different, always knew they were quirky, always knew they didn't fit in, and neither master didn't, and they didn't use all those words, but that they really are neurodivergent and gifted. They just never use the words. So I teach them to teach their children how to communicate, how to speak, their feelings, how to understand what's going on, and be effective at expressing who they are in a way that is kind and compassionate toward the listener. Because the listener doesn't understand most of the time, the other people. So it's like, okay, you can say you're different or you can say you understand, and this is still your process. It can be different and it can still be okay. There's no wrong.
Yeah. Seems so important. And back to that concept of space, I would think that would also be important for a parent to give their child permission to have the space that they need to process.
Right. We have space physically and emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and socially. Yeah. So it's space on all those levels that then creates the psychological safety. So that person, because a neurodivergent person's brain is not evolving in the way we're taught. It's got asymmetry happening. It's not completely harmonized. So the person's 50 instead of a neurotypical brain of more like 23. So there's a big variance in the way the brain actually is developing and processing and learning executive functioning. It's not the same animal. So a lot of times it's okay. We give each other space. One of the things that works really well is writing. Is not only journaling for the person, but I have parents have a big board, write it down what you want done or how to do it or what the rights and responsibilities are within the family so that we learn law of natural consequences and the law of cause and effect. And some of those things that seems very simple are a little bit tricky to a neurodivergent person when they're young. So it's like just kind of role modeling it with everybody involved in the family so that the child is included, they don't feel excluded, and that everybody's living by the same rules.
Wow. So what happens at 50? That's so fascinating, isn't it? I mean, what comes together for those people?
Finally, the brain harmonizes. And so now that brain that was evolving at different rates finally comes together for the same rate. So a neurotypical brain, you can read all the books, goes like this, and a neurodivergent brain, you've heard the phrase, you're too smart for your britches, right? Mm-hmm. You're too smart. Why did you do that? Well, I can tell you why they did that. They're really intellectually advanced, but emotionally and judgment-wise, they can't do it yet because the brain hasn't developed that skill yet. Some neurodivergent people aren't real verbal till they're like 6, 7, 8 years old because the language is still developing. The executive function is still developing.
Is that because they're thinking too often, like they're stuck in that process of thinking?
And it's over reinforced. It's over reinforced too in our culture. Oh, you're smart, so it's only about your brain. You're not a brain on a stick.
Yeah,
there's like so much more.
Great. I'm never gonna forget lollipops. Dianne told me I'm not a brain on a stick.
I say that a lot to people, and they look at me all curious. But seriously, there's more to all of us than just our intelligence.
I'm going to get a T-shirt designed for you.
Yeah, exactly.
We're all going to have one.
Exactly.
I love it because it sounds like a key component of what you're teaching is not only communication with others, but communication and understanding with self, knowing what our boundaries are, whether we're typical or neurodivergent, and being able to articulate those boundaries so that the individual has the space that they need to really be their most gifted self. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, you are. And one of the important things about boundaries, I'm really glad you brought that up, that it is so vital, is I teach inner boundaries and outer boundaries. And most people do the outer boundaries. They may have heard of it, maybe or maybe not follow it. But when I talk about inner boundaries, it's really important for gifted people to understand that. And what I mean by that is if you bring 100% of yourself into every situation, you are going to feed people with a fire hose and they're not going to know what to do with you. And then you're not going to be received very well. So inner boundaries is taking 5 or 10 minutes before any interaction and saying, okay, how much of me needs to show up for this? And bring that. So if you're going to the grocery store, you do not need 100% of your gifted, cool, neurodivergent self. You probably need about 2. Right? If you're going to be around a bunch of cool, other gifted, really neat, neurodivergent, intuitive go-getters, bring all of yourself because they can handle it. And so to learn that skill to say, okay, before I do something, how much of me is going to show up here? And that's different than being that delusional self, like I'm just going to mask. It's a conscious decision. And then you can give yourself permission to change your mind. So say I'm going to do some activity and I think, oh, I'll just bring half of myself. That'll work. And then I get there and I'm like, oh, wow, there's all these really cool intuitive people. And I want to bring more of me. I can always bring more of me. I kind of use like a dimmer switch dial. Like I can ramp it all the way up. And if I get that kind of glazed look, I just ramp it back down.
Well, I guess it's back to boundaries, right? Of knowing, okay, this is my pattern after 10 minutes, I start to feel this way. Perhaps I can insert a break. Is that part of the way you teach it?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
And it's so fun because now the person's empowered to stand in their sovereignty and not feel like they're an alien all the time or that they're going to be misunderstood if they open their mouth.
And they can truly bring their best self wherever they go and be understood and present
feel
however.
understood, protect their energy, all within that side. So,
wow, it's so fascinating. I asked that question about the child because I feel like my son is that.
I'm sure your answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you're talking about that, I mean, I'm tearing up. I feel like this is why I was one of the reasons I was supposed to be here today. So thank you for sharing this with me and with us today, because it's really fascinating to.
Oh, you're welcome. I really believe that if we all give ourselves permission to stand in who we are, which we're all already doing, and we are that light, then it gives other people permission to take that risk to do it for themselves. And now we have an empowered world, right? And it's so important for our children. And it's so important for adults. There's so many adults. All the people that I work with are adults, and most of them don't know they're gifted. I don't use the word gifted at first because they think that it's pretentious. They have a judgment around it when that's not what I'm talking about. And so when I finally use the word down the road, they go, oh, it's a thing. And they understand that it's a real thing and it's okay. Yeah. And that all people have value. Not only 1% of the world's gifted. And everybody has equal value. We all bring something different to the table. And so to come out of that judgment and say, what cool thing do we all get to bring to make something really neat? I kind of think of it like tea. Like we have a base tea and then you add all the different flavors or all the different things, and it's still beautiful.
Can you share a little bit more about some of the individuals that you've worked with and how you've helped them, like some deeper stories with it?
Oh, I have so many cool people. Well, obviously Kenny's one of them. And I have this one person that I work with now that it's one of my favorite hours of the week. Well, first of all, I don't work typical people. I work on a retainer, and all of my sessions are like an hour and a half or 2 hours long because no gifted person can do a 50-minute hour. That's unreasonable. So we just go with whatever we do.
Deep dive. Yeah.
And I also encourage all of my people to email, text, or call if they need anything at any time. So I have a neuroscience researcher I work with, and he's high up in a university, and sometimes he gets in those meetings, and he's very intuitive, but he can't admit it because he's a science researcher person. So he's trying to figure out how to do it, but he knows. And so he'll call me. I'm in the bathroom and I'm in this meeting, and what do I say? And then he'll give me the rundown and I'll tell him what to say. I'll go, oh, okay, thank you. And then he'll call me back. So we have those kinds of conversations. He also has lots of children. So I help him with, you have 5 kids and they're all neurodivergent and they're all gifted and they're gifted differently. And this is how you're going to do that. So that's really fun. And I have another woman that I work with who's in the pharmaceutical bioengineering, like real specific data driven, amazing, fascinating things. And her whole thing when we first started working together was she was stuck in her career. People didn't see who she was. They didn't understand her. She kept getting judged, and people, they'd want her to be promoted. But then when she showed up, her full self, they're like, well, you're not qualified. It was all of these things. She could never really realize her potential. And so we started working together because she was stuck, which is where most people start with me. And now, several years later, she's getting ready to step into some really huge opportunities after lots of opening of her understanding and her mindset, and seeing that there's a whole world out there that she was never exposed to because she was highly over-reinforced for her intelligence her whole life. Never really realized that her emotional self mattered, her spiritual self mattered. She knew they were there, but didn't bring them to the table in the same way. Mm-hmm. And so I had this intuition in a session once. I said, you need to go to this event and you need to meet this person. And I don't know why, but go. So because she follows directions and she's like me, okay, I'll go. She went, and not only did she go to the event, she got the VIP ticket to the event, right? And then she comes back and she says, well, I resonated with all of the business owners, not too many of the participants. I said, exactly, that's where you need to be. Those are your people.
Those are your people.
And so she started really embracing that there was way more to her business ability and her presence than she ever imagined. And now it's just every day something really amazing. And that brings me such joy to see her happy, to see her life evolving. And I get to have this small part of asking the right questions at the right time and using my intuition to really help guide somebody and navigate something they can't see yet, but I know they can see it. And that's just magic. It just brings tears to my eyes even telling you about it.
If someone's listening to this now, high-level professional, for example, and they're thinking, oh, I wonder if perhaps I might fit into this category, or perhaps their partner or their child, what are some questions they can be asking themselves to know, oh, should I be reaching out to Dianne for this support? What are some great questions they can be looking at themselves?
One of the best questions to ask, especially for adults, is, do you have a burning heart's desire and you feel stuck and can't quite get there from here? Like you want to follow it, but you're not really sure how you can do that without losing your current life, that kind of thing. Or a lot of other people say, well, I have depression or anxiety or I have these things and the external things aren't helping and I have to find a new and creative way. A lot of the people who work with me have exhausted all kinds of other resources. And they're like, where were you all this time? I said, right here, doing my thing.
Oh, man. Well, you have a show called Someone Gets Me, and I love the name of the show. That just makes sense to me after listening to the show. Can you share a little bit more with our audience, a little bit more about your show and also how they can connect with you and work with you and just everything else you have going on in 2025?
Oh, I have a lot happening. Someone Gets Me is my show. It's also the title of my most recent book. I have 8 published books, and it is named for my client who I said, I'm supposed to do a podcast. And this is 5 years ago. And I don't know what I'm going to title it because I suck at titles. And,
you got
I know I suck at titles. And so I let other people do that. And I'm just like, I don't know what to say. And she says, well, Someone Gets Me. She goes, the first time someone engages with you for the first hour, they're walking away going, Someone Gets Me. So I'm like, that's the name.
That's brilliant.
And it's turned into this really powerful show that's now in like 72 countries or something. And people are finding that they can be heard and understood. So that's my show and my book. And you could go to visionsapplied.com. And that's my overall website that has all kinds of information and blogs and everything. And I'm creating a Someone Gets Me experience right now. That is a mentoring experience with me that's all custom created for each person. And then we're going to do a 3-day retreat with only neurodivergent, gifted people who are serious about standing in who they are. And so I'm very excited about it. We're going to use how AI and technology impacts the mental health and wellness of gifted neurodivergent people because we're expected to keep up with something that's a machine and we're human beings, not human doing. So we're going to bring all those things together in a magical way. So we'll see what happens.
Wow. Sounds amazing.
I love that. No, that's incredible. And I'm so glad that you were able to be on the panel today to be able to witness and listen into this as well.
Yeah, it's really special.
Super
Thank
empowering.
you.
And a lot of people actually have started to actually follow Dianne. A lot of people find her through Someone Gets Me on her YouTube channel. Her channel gets views daily, and we were working with you 4 or 5 years ago on your podcast show on that side, and people are reaching out to you this last couple of weeks. They found you from videos from 4 years ago, podcasts,
right?
Which is incredible.
It's so funny because my podcast started because I'm neurodivergent, and somebody said you should do a podcast. You have a lot to say, and I'm like, okay, and so I just started doing one, and people go, oh, you have to think and you have to figure. I'm like, that's not how I do it. I dial in, feel the energy, and I go. And so I was just doing an audio podcast. Then I went to your Broadcast Your Authority event. Well, first I met you guys at a really cool workshop. And I'm like, oh, I really like them.
And we really like you.
We said the same thing. You guys were across the room and I'm like, I have to know them. And I remember going back and telling my team, I have to know, I met these people. I have to know them, but they live far away, but I'm going to know them. It was just so funny. So then I went to your event and I'm like, video? Okay, well, I'll do that. I don't really prepare a whole lot. I just know it'll all work out. So I did that. And now, that was 4 years ago, right? Somewhere in that. And
we're working together again. Yeah. But you literally told me the other day, you're like, I had 2 or 3 people come in from some of the videos that we created with you.
Last 2 or
4 years
three, because I do a free get to know you call, 30 minutes free. You can talk to me about anything you want to, a show, a comment. It's on every show. And because I really believe in serving. And so I believe if I serve with my open heart and open spirit, all the right things happen. So I totally do it all the time. No 30-minute get to know you call has ever gone 30 minutes. Ever. And, one, the woman I spoke about, she called and she goes, I saw your show. I've watched every video and I'm hiring you. That's
golden.
Profound.
That's
profound.
Right.
Yeah.
And now 3 years later, she's not missed a week.
Wow.
Seeing me in
That's
3 weeks, even when she had
incredible.
COVID, even when we're both traveling, all of it, we
special.
still find a way. She goes, because it's a relationship. It's not a transaction.
Yeah.
And I really focus on that. And so that's really funny. But the last 3 get to know you calls, I always ask, where'd you find me? Well, I was looking for stuff on YouTube and your video was suggested. And then of course I had to watch another 10. And I go, well, which video? All 3 of these people, there were videos that were 4 years old. And they were the ones that you produced for me. And I'm like, okay, there's my evidence. There's no
There's your
other
evidence.
comment,
Evidence.
right?
Yeah.
It's like the proof is in
Proof
the
is in
pudding.
the pudding. Yeah.
Right. And that's the way it is. And to me, it's the most beautiful thing because we all put content out there all the time and we wonder where it goes, but we will never know our true impact ever. We will never know whose life we saved,
Yeah.
whose life we transformed, who we helped awaken by simply speaking our truth and standing in that authority. And to me, that's a big piece of the evidence of it. And one of the guys got on the call and he was like, oh my God, it's you. I'm speechless. He didn't know what to say at first.
He was like, I actually got you on the phone call.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't
So
some other
powerful.
person. It was really me.
Well, we're super grateful, and thank you so much for working with us and trusting us and building your show. And those are the types of things and stories that we love to hear. Again, those of you watching, be sure to follow Dianne A. Allen and subscribe to her Someone Gets Me channel on YouTube and her podcast. It's incredible. She has great stories, great people that she's had on there. And those of you that are watching our show, be sure to subscribe on Broadcast Your Authority on YouTube. We appreciate all the love and reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or anywhere that you listen and tune into your audio podcast. Super grateful for all of you, and we'll see you in the next episode.